Hey, Dethroners. Welcome back to the Dethroning Your Inner Critic YouTube channel. I'm Joanna Kleinman, psychotherapist, empowerment coach, and CEO of the Dethroning Your Inner Critic coaching and consulting company. So June is Men's Mental Health Month. And we can't talk about men's mental health without talking about the role that is crucial for women to play in men's healing. Because what women say they want and what they actually want are often miles apart. So many women say that they want a vulnerable man who shares his feelings, but we need to talk about whether or not that is really true, because vulnerability is really not that easy to understand. So we're going to talk today about what vulnerability really means. Now, Brené Brown, she's one of my favorites. She is a shame researcher, and she's the author of many extraordinary books. And she calls vulnerability uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. But for many men, true vulnerability means sharing weak sides of themselves that other people could potentially use to hurt them. So many men think, well, it's actually really not that safe to open up, especially to women. Men are afraid to tell people when things are problematic psychologically, financially, and they carry sadness or shame or a deep sense of inferiority or inadequacy, so much so that they don't even see it themselves. So one of the things that Brené Brown talks about is at an event, she was delivering a talk and a man approached her after one of her lectures about shame and said to her, "I like what you had to say, but my wife and daughters would rather see me die on top of my white horse than watch me fall off." And when we really reach out about being vulnerable, we get the shit beat out of us. And don't tell me it's from the coaches and the dads out there, because the women in my life are harder on me than anyone else. Right? So that's a really impactful statement. The women in my life are harder on me than anyone else. And I recently read that shame is the swampland of the soul. And men don't feel safe anywhere to express shame, not with other men, for fear that they're going to appear weak or inferior, or it's going to be turned around to use it against them. And they don't feel safe sharing their vulnerability with women because they're afraid that women will lose their sense of attraction towards them. So this is so prevalent in the messages that we all get every day in our culture. Just the other night, I was watching the movie Forgetting Sarah Marshall for the 100th time. I love that movie. But the main character, Peter, who's played by Jason Segel, is depicted throughout the whole movie as weak and pathetic as he's crying over his relationship ending. And then there's this scene where he has to stab a pig to death for a luau. And, you know, he's crying and you know, he's shamed for that. So men are relentlessly shamed, okay? Not just alongside the major events in their lives, okay? It's the day-to-day small little undermines, right? Or little senses of embarrassment. That is crucial to a man's self-esteem. So shame is that sense that there's something fundamentally wrong with me, that I'm in some way unworthy of love or of value. Okay. So when we carry shame, it decimates our self-esteem. And if the shame is really deep enough, it actually turns into self-contempt. Okay. So here are just some examples of how men can get triggered every day into shame, right? So in a sports conversation, they can't remember the name of the players on their local NFL team or NBA team. When they don't have a good sense of direction. That's why men can never ask for directions. When they can't describe exactly what's wrong with their car or what's wrong with their computer. When they get nervous about public speaking. And then, of course, there's sexual dysfunction, premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, or this is a big one, when they're in the presence of other men and they feel in some way dominated or emasculated by other women. Okay. So men, not only are they shamed regularly, but they live in this incessant anxiety that they're kind of waiting to be further shamed. Okay. So they live in this undistinguished and unconscious fear of embarrassment, intimidation, humiliation. So they're kind of on guard, vigilant, watchful. This is why they may keep their distance. This is why sometimes they act much more confident than they really are because they're trying to avoid further shame, right? And then when they do feel shame, they act it out by, sometimes getting angry, sometimes even bullying. With unhealthy men, that gets expressed as abuse, sometimes even violence to deal with it or to avoid it. Okay. So men go through life as if they are kind of on patrol or sort of in this war zone, and they never know when the next attack is going to come. And, they're so frequently feeling this in their lives that the world can even seem a bit unsafe. And so Brené Brown talks about this, right? That over their entire lifetimes, when men are repeatedly shamed, they have one of two responses. Either they get pissed off or they shut down. And over a lifetime, this may lead to even, explosions. So Brené Brown says that the antidote to shame is empathy, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. But I also think that the antidote is that men need to understand that they are not alone in their shame, because I believe that almost all men carry some sort of shame that they're not willing to see within themselves, let alone to be vulnerable in sharing it with other men. So, I lead a program for women. It's a program that's called Mastering Your Mind. I lead it to women all over the world. And one of the most powerful parts of this program is to bring small groups of women together so that they can see themselves in each other and recognize that their inner struggles are really no different than my inner struggles or any other woman's inner struggles. And that is what we need for men. I've been asked repeatedly, when am I going to have a Mastering Your Mind program for men? And I promise you that will be coming, because I love to work with men. I do a lot of work with men one-on-one. I do think it would be incredibly powerful for men to have the opportunity to express vulnerability with other men who are also committed to expressing their own vulnerability. But, it's harder to get groups of men together who are willing to express their own shame and express their own vulnerability. So, this is partly why I'm talking about this, because it's important that men be able to identify everyday triggers to share their stories of shame, to speak out about shameful events in their lives. And the bottom line is that vulnerability, disclosing your shame to other people, is exactly what heals shame. So the work of healing shame within men requires them to accept the inherent vulnerability that's involved in exposing and processing their shame, right? Otherwise, what happens is men are automatically working on trying to hide or cover up or deny their shame. And that's when they're most at risk of becoming defensive or withdrawn, especially when they're challenged by other people. So we often find that the men who are willing to take the risk of sharing their shame is men who see other men courageously modeling being vulnerable, and that they see vulnerability as a strength. So I want you to think about the men in your life. Could be your partner, it could be your son, it could be your father, it could be a boss or a colleague. You know, my dad died at 80 years old last September, and he had a lifelong battle with shame. He used food to shove down his emotions, which I believe is ultimately what cost him his life. So witnessing my father's struggle with shame, I've tried to instill within my sons the idea of talking about shame, but that's very hard. My sons are now 22 and 20. And, you know, I already see how they struggle with shame because all men do, right? And so as a woman, it's really important to talk about shame with the men in our life. Now, we can invite our men to engage in conversations where we're both sharing aspects of our personal shame. If the men in your life are willing, you can validate that man's courage and let him know how much it strengthens your love and respect and admiration of him rather than seeing him as weak. Because sharing our shame is incredibly courageous. But here's the issue. Discomfort is the enemy of courage. If we're choosing to be courageous, we have to choose our courage over our discomfort, because you can't have courage and comfort at the same time. Having courage, stepping outside of your comfort zone, feels uncomfortable. So the greatest shame trigger for men is not to be perceived as weak. So if vulnerability is considered weak, then it's shaming to be vulnerable. So in some way, men carry shame simply for being men. So think about this for a minute. Think about all of the images that are around us all the time about what it means to be a man, right? We have images, guys with ripped bodies, and they're driving expensive cars, and they come home to big houses and loving wives, right? And these men are always successful and happy and strong. And, you know, that's the image that men have been comparing themselves to for their whole life. And these images are how advertisers make money, right? By making men feel inadequate and that they need to buy fancy cars and expensive, expensive supplements and, live in big houses, right? And so all of us do carry deep wounds within our hearts. And we all have developed unhealthy ways of either ignoring those wounds or numbing them and overcompensating for our deep wounds. And that's why I've developed the work that I develop with the MIND Method and mastering your mind. It's all about understanding how these deep wounds keep resurfacing over and over again in our lives today, and how these deep wounds will continue to keep us from experiencing the joy and abundance and love and connection that we so desperately crave in our lives. So there are specific ways that human beings get wounded, and that impacts all of us because it causes our future behavior. So once you know the specific ways that all human beings get wounded, and how all human beings continue to drag these wounds with us throughout our lives, now we have the power to actually reverse the damage. Now we actually have the power to not only heal the wound, to make the wound go away, but then to not continue to bring the wound with us as we design our future, which changes the course of our lives. So that's one of the things that has really distinguished my life's work, because I don't believe that human beings can be damaged. I don't think there are damaged human beings. I think there are unhealthy human beings, but I believe that if we're willing, that we can heal from anything and everything. Now, there are a lot of benefits that we can actually get from our wounds, okay? Like if you carry a wound from your early childhood that you're stupid, you might have gotten 2 PhDs. You might be a very successful person that's created a really powerful career to ensure that no one would ever see you as stupid. But there is a cost to this, okay? And the cost is that if we don't heal our wounds, the success that we create to overcompensate our wounds ends up becoming bankrupt. And I think that a lot of men have built their lives around covering up their deep wounds, so much so that sometimes they don't even know that they have wounds, let alone that they have built their lives around continuing to cover up these wounds. And that gets men caught in a vicious cycle of overwhelm and anxiety. And for men, those emotions get expressed as anger, because culturally, that's the only acceptable emotion for men to feel. Shame, sadness, and hurt and fear are all expressed as anger. And, there's a lot of research out there that tells us that men need to feel competent more than they need support. Now, women don't really understand this because women need to feel support. So women don't really understand how important it is for a man to feel loved by a woman, to feel appreciated and valued by a woman, because that creates a man's experience of being competent. Okay. So if we knew just how important it is to make our men feel loved and appreciated and valued, it might change the way that we interact with men, and it would in turn change the way that men interacted with us. Because when men feel like they're doing something that causes us to be happy, it changes the way that they see themselves, and then they want more of that from us. And so they actually start showing up in ways that also make us feel good and valued. Okay. So here's the thing. Women's happiness is the currency that men thrive on. And it's kind of like how a mother thrives on the happiness of her child, right? When we see our children happy, oh my gosh, that's what brings us joy. So when men feel appreciated, okay, and this is not just with our partners, it could be our sons, it could be our fathers, again, it could be our colleagues or our bosses, but it changes them from the inside. Now, I want to be clear, I'm only talking about healthy men, okay? I'm only talking about healthy men, but I will say that there are way more healthy men out there than unhealthy men, okay? So there's a dynamic that can happen in the relationship between men and women because men and women don't understand each other. We are two different animals. Our brains are hardwired differently, and we need different things from each other. And men don't really understand what women need, and women don't really understand what men need, right? So women will often assign meaning to a man's behavior, and it's faulty meaning, but they don't know that they're assigning meaning, right? They just, kind of think that that's the truth of what's going on over there with the man. And then men assign meaning to a woman's behavior, right? And so instead of uncovering the deeper wound that's getting triggered, because women have deeper wounds that get triggered in different ways than men do, men and women just keep reacting to each other from their deeper core wounds and their deeper triggers, and they don't even know that they're getting triggered into deeper core wounds. So, I love using the example of taking out the garbage, right? Women go crazy when men forget to take out the garbage, and they overreact because it's not about the garbage, right? What might be underneath it is, I've told you this 100 times and you don't listen to me because I'm not important enough to you and my feelings don't matter. And if I were more important to you, you would have heard me that, Wednesday night is garbage night, right? And that's actually not what's going on at all. And that's another podcast episode, right? But men forgetting things or not hearing us or walking over the same pair of socks and not seeing it to throw it in the hamper. That's not about us. That's really more about their brains. Okay. So understanding how men are responding to women, why they're responding the way they are, and how women are responding to men, and understanding the triggers that are creating our damaging responses is really some of the most important work that we can ever do. And most women have it backwards. So here's an example, right? Imagine you have had a hard day. You come home from work and there's your partner waiting for you, and you sit down together. Maybe you have a glass of wine and you talk about the day's challenges. Okay. If you're a woman, this conversation might be not only very relaxing to you, but it actually might make you feel closer to your man, right? Makes you feel closer to your partner. You might feel calmer, and your stress level might even go way down. Now, if you're a man and you come home from a hard day of work and your partner's at home waiting for you, and she gives you a glass of wine and asks you as the man, tell me about your day, right? Well, as the man, you might tell her about your day, but the difference is that conversation to a man is not helpful. Actually, it does not diminish their stress and overwhelm. It does not relieve it. And the difference between women and men who, receive supportive behaviors, okay, is that when women receive support, it decreases their stress. When men receive support, it doesn't impact their stress, because what reduces men's stress is feeling competent. So coming home at the end of the day and talking about work does not relieve their stress, because what they're talking about is a problem that still needs to be solved at work. So talking about it, not only does it not help, it just makes the man aware that there's a problem that he needs to figure out how to solve. Now, women want to be useful. They want to help. They want to be supportive. But their desire to help men is competing with the man's desire to feel competent, to solve the problem, right? To leave the problem at work so it doesn't burden him at home. Because men are not socialized to experience value by just being there for their partners, which is exactly what women want. Sometimes women want their partners to just be there the way a woman would, the way, just kind of hold them and stroke their hair and not say much and just love them. Okay. But men need to solve problems. So when you're trying to share a problem with your male partner and it seems like he doesn't understand, or maybe he isn't even trying to understand, it is not because he doesn't care. It's because his brain is hardwired, working on overdrive to try and find a solution to what you're saying. So he's listening for what's the solution here. He might even say, get to the point. Okay. Stop babbling and giving me all these details. Just get to the point. It's not because he doesn't care. Okay. It's because he's trying to hear the problem so he can find a solution. And listen, maybe there's no solution. Maybe the solution is just to listen and offer support. But the problem with that is that men generally don't think this way. Men think about solutions to the problems that you're telling them about. So if you have this repeated conflict in your relationship with a man, then what might happen is that the man's brain, is consistently associating these conflicts with feeling like he's a failure and feeling powerless. And men have very limited ways of coping with that feeling of feeling like a failure and feeling powerless. And so what they do is either they give up and they shut down or they get angry. Okay. Now, that's a shame-based response to frustration and insecurity. They're taught from a very young age. They have to be strong. They have to keep it together. They have to be competent. And feeling like they can't solve a problem leaves them in a place where they don't feel like men. They feel incompetent. They feel like failures. So men are not always aware this is happening. So sometimes they'll blame their partners, right? And they'll say things to their partner like, you're never satisfied, or it doesn't matter because no matter what I do, I can't make you happy. And women feel when a man is saying that, that's not true. I keep telling you how I'll be happy, which is just for you to, make me feel like you're listening and you're hearing me, right? So it's this vicious cycle, okay? And like I said, when a man says, get to the point, or, you just have to get over this and stop feeling this way. Well, women feel like they're not getting what they need from their men. And so this is how we get into these repetitive, ongoing conflicts that can create a lot of psychological distress, particularly among men, okay? Because what happens for men is it's not just that they're frustrated with their partners, they're even more frustrated with themselves because they can't figure out how to solve the problem. And to men, that equals powerlessness, and then powerlessness equals failure. And they get upset because they don't know what women want. And they think, I don't know how to make you feel better. I don't know how to make you happy. And I don't really know what I should do with all of the things that you're telling me. So then they continue to feel powerless. And that feeling of failure with women is excruciating for men, especially if at the same time they're holding on to failures at work or other personal failures or a history of other things that have made them feel powerless and like they're a failure. Okay. So if they can't figure out how they're supposed to act as husbands or fathers, they are utterly devastated and ashamed. And that's when they go inward and they internalize. And to women, this might look like apathy. This might look like callousness. This might look like they don't care. Okay. And then we can't certainly address men's mental health without talking about sex. Okay. Because, kind of men have had it hammered into their minds that their need for sex can be interpreted as pathological, okay? And that their need for sex is bad. But sex gives men fuel, and most women don't know that. And the reason why sex gives men fuel is not just it's not just a physical release for men, okay? Sex is actually something that makes them feel appreciated, right? And when men feel appreciated by us, they have our backs as women. Because guess what? It motivates them to do more things to make them feel appreciated. Because when men feel appreciated, that's when they feel competent. Okay. Now, women, from a biological standpoint, feel most emotionally and psychologically safe when they feel that a man has her back. And I get it. We are powerful beyond measure as women, and we can do a lot of amazing things. But it is from an evolutionary standpoint, there are very few things that make us feel more safe than when we have a man that has our back. Okay. But when a man doesn't feel competent, he's going to try and find a place in his life where he feels competent. Okay. So men need to figure out, how can I let her know that I have her back? And women need to figure out, how can I let him know that I really appreciate and value him and what he does for me and what he does for our family? Because appreciation is what makes them feel competent. So healthy men, I'm talking about healthy men. Healthy men are motivated by wanting to make us happy. They're not motivated by wanting to hurt us. When they feel shamed, when they feel not competent, when they feel like they can't make us happy, they might act in ways that do hurt us. Okay. But, there are definitely more healthy men out there than unhealthy men. And women don't realize how much they are reacting to men from their own core wounds. Now, that's why I created the work that I do, because understanding our own automatic triggers from our own core wounds has us responding very differently to a lot of things in our life, including the men in our life, right? And that includes our sons, that includes our brothers, that includes our fathers. It's not just our partners. Women have more power than we will ever realize in the battle for men healing their own deep wounds. So if you'd like to know more about the work that I do, both with women and men, you can go to my website, dethroningyourinnercritic.com, schedule a clarity conversation for us to connect, because I'd love to tell you more about the work that I do. And thank you so much for tuning in today, and I'll see you soon.